Brooklyn never really slept. The streets hummed with the rhythm of subways below, the chatter of late-night diners, and the glow of neon signs buzzing against the dark. On the corner of Atlantic Avenue, a 24-hour deli flickered like a tired lighthouse. Inside, Liam Hayes wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that night. His sneakers were frayed at the edges, his apron smelled of onions and grease, and his back ached from double shifts, but his eyes still lifted toward the door every time the bell rang. And then she walked in, Ava. La pushed through the glass door. Her hoodie damp from the mist, a stack of textbooks pressed against her chest. Strands of dark hair had slipped from her ponytail, framing her tired but determined face. Despite the exhaustion clinging to her, she managed a small smile when she saw him. "You're late," Liam teased, already reaching for the cocoa mix. "Dryer broke at the laundromat," she sighed, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "We had to hang everything by hand. My arms may never recover." He chuckled, setting the steaming mug in front of her. "You still made it. That counts." She wrapped her hands around the cup, soaking in the warmth. "Tomorrow's the interview. If I don't screw it up, I might finally swap detergent fumes for spreadsheets." Liam leaned on the counter, the corners of his mouth curving upward. "And if I get lucky, some venture fund doesn't delete my prototype email, maybe even reads it." Her eyes brightened with pride. "You will. You've worked too hard not to." They clinked mugs like champagne flutes, the small sound filling the empty deli with something warmer than the fluorescent lights ever could. After closing, they climbed the rusted fire escape up to the roof of their tiny studio apartment. From there, the Manhattan skyline stretched out like a crown of lights across the water. The city looked untouchable, but from that rooftop, it was theirs. Ava pulled her jacket tighter. "One day, I'll sit in one of those buildings. Not serving coffee, not making copies, actually making decisions." "Forget boardrooms," Liam said, dropping onto the tar roof with a grin. "I'll build you your own company. Hayes Labs, corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows, and free hot cocoa on tap." She laughed, the sound soft but full. Then she grew serious, eyes fixed on the glittering skyline. "Do you ever get scared? That all this dreaming is just dreaming?" "Of course," he admitted, "but fear's not the problem. Standing still is. Being scared and moving anyway, that's courage. Standing still just keeps you broke forever." Her lips tugged into a smile, fragile but real. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Together they sat in silence, the city alive beneath them, their shared dreams strung like stars overhead. On Ava's 22nd birthday, Liam pulled her down to the East River. The night air bit at their cheeks, the water catching the glow of bridges and passing headlights. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small package wrapped clumsily in deli receipt paper. "Don't laugh," he muttered. Inside was a brass keychain in the shape of a paper airplane. On the back, crudely etched letters spelled out FLY, First Love. You. Beneath it was the date they had first met. Ava's throat tightened. "This is ridiculously cheesy, but you like it," he pressed nervously, instead of answering. She kissed him quick, sure, a promise pressed into the night air. When she pulled back, her voice was soft. "I'll keep it on my bag. Every interview, every job, so I never forget who gave me my runway." He smiled, heart pounding. "Then I'll be your control tower." That summer was a blur of exhaustion and grit. Ava bounced between her internship, classes, and the laundromat. Liam lived in a haze of deli grease and late-night coding sessions, sending prototypes into the digital void, hoping someone, anyone, would reply. But no matter how thin time stretched, they always made room for each other. A quick taco at the 24-hour spot down the block, a stolen hour on the fire escape, watching planes carve across the sky, a simple text before bed, get home safe, bills piled up. Rent jumped. Liam's mum called one night with a health scare, and Ava picked up extra shifts to help cover what he couldn't. When words failed them, they just held hands. Sometimes silence was the only thing strong enough to carry them. Even so, they kept the flame alive with small promises. When you land your first job, when I raise my first funding round, when we finally move out of here, those phrases became anchors, holding them steady in waters that wanted to sweep them apart. Late one night, after a grueling shift, Liam jogged home with the spark of a new idea thrumming in his head. An algorithm that could predict traffic patterns from real-time crowd behavior. It was the kind of idea he needed Ava to hear first. She always poked holes no one else could see. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Ava, boss is letting me sit in the main boardroom tomorrow. First real contract meeting. I'm terrified. He grinned, thumbs flying. You'll crush it. You always do. Can't wait to tell you my new idea. Her reply came seconds later, a single paper airplane emoji. He smiled, slipping the phone away. At the corner, the light blinked yellow. Tires shrieked against asphalt. Headlights cut across the dark like a blade. Someone screamed. For one heartbeat, Liam thought of Ava's smile, the paper airplane keychain swinging from her backpack, the rooftop where they dreamed of conquering the city. Then everything went black. Ava sat on their fire escape, the cool metal biting into her legs as she waited for his reply. 3 dots blinked on the screen, then disappeared. She waited longer and longer. When her phone finally rang, her stomach dropped before she even looked. The caller ID read, Brooklyn Heights Medical Center. She ran like the pavement was crumbling beneath her, sneakers pounding wet streets, lungs burning. The hospital was a maze of white walls and antiseptic air. Through the ICU window, she saw him still pale, wrapped in tubes and wires. Her heart clawed against her ribs. A doctor's voice broke through the haze. Severe head trauma. We've stabilized him, but there's a chance of memory loss. When he wakes, he may not remember everything or everyone. Ava pressed her hand to the glass, her breath fogging the surface. Her voice cracked as she whispered, I'm here. Liam, I'm right here, but inside. Beneath the harsh hospital lights, the boy she loved lay silent, teetering between the life they had built together and the abyss that threatened to swallow it all. The first thing Liam became aware of was the relentless beep 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 of a monitor pulling him up from the depths. His eyelids were heavy, his skull a throbbing weight. He forced his eyes open and winced at the sterile brightness overhead. Welcome back, Mr. Hayes. A doctor in a white coat leaned into his vision, voice calm, practiced. You're at Brooklyn Heights Medical Center. You were in an accident. Accident. The word buzzed through his fogged brain. He searched the darkness inside his head, trying to reel in memories, but came up with nothing except the flash of headlights, the scream of tires, the sensation of being thrown into oblivion. My name, he rasped. Liam Hayes, the doctor confirmed. Do you remember that much? Liam hesitated. The name fit on his tongue, but it felt foreign, as if he were borrowing it. Yes, maybe. The doctor offered a gentle smile. Confusion is normal after head trauma. There may be gaps in your memory. We'll assess more as you stabilize. Through the haze, Liam caught movement at the glass door. A girl stood there, hands pressed against the pane, eyes wide with tears. His chest constricted. Something about her tugged at him, an ache deep and unnameable. He opened his mouth to call out. The doctor turned, blocking his view. We'll keep visits limited for now. Too much stimulation can be overwhelming. The girl was ushered away. Liam swallowed against the dryness in his throat. Who was that? The doctor paused, eyes searching his face. Someone who's been waiting. The ache inside Liam sharpened. He didn't know her name, but a paper airplane glimmered in the corner of his mind. Then it was gone. Ava sank into a plastic chair outside the ICU, fingers trembling around the brass paper airplane keychain hanging from her bag. She had been there for hours, praying, bargaining with every god she'd ever heard of. When Liam's eyes had finally opened, her heart had leapt only to shatter when he hadn't recognized her. He doesn't remember me, she whispered, voice breaking. Please, not this. The nurse touched her shoulder gently. Give him time. Memory can return. But Ava knew the look in Liam's eyes. It hadn't just been confusion. It had been emptiness. The boy who used to whisper dreams to her on their rooftop had looked at her like she was a stranger. 2 days later, Ava's worst fear materialized. The corridor filled with the click of polished shoes, the rustle of expensive fabric. A man in a sharp grey suit strode down the hall like he owned the ground beneath him. Beside him, a woman in a silk scarf walked with poise, her eyes bright with unshed tears. They pushed into Liam's room without hesitation. Liam. The woman cried, rushing to his bedside. She cupped his face with manicured hands, voice trembling. Oh, my son. Liam blinked up at her. Son. Yes, the man said firmly, resting a heavy hand on Liam's shoulder. I'm Richard Hayes. This is your mother, Eleanor. We've been looking for you for years. The words hit Ava like a blow. She froze in the doorway, air sucked from her lungs. Liam looked between them, brows furrowed. The titles made sense on paper, father, mother, but the memories wouldn't form. I don't remember. That's okay, Eleanor soothed. You've been through so much. All that matters is you're alive, and you're coming home with us. Home, the word clanged hollow inside his chest. When Richard and Eleanor stepped into the hall to speak with the doctor, Ava darted forward, clutching the keychain in her hand. Liam, she whispered urgently. It's me, Ava. His eyes met hers. There it was, again that tug, that flicker of something familiar, but it slipped through his grasp before he could hold it. I'm sorry. I don't. Her throat closed. She forced a smile through her tears. You do know me. You gave me this. She held up the brass keychain. Liam frowned, brow creasing as if trying to summon a lost dream. His lips parted, then Eleanor's voice cut sharp through the doorway. Who is this? Richard's eyes narrowed, cool and appraising. Miss, are you a nurse? I'm his girlfriend, Ava said, her voice shaking. The corridor stilled. Eleanor's polite smile didn't reach her eyes. Strange. He's never mentioned you, because he doesn't remember, Ava cried. But I'm telling you, we've been together for years. He loves me. Richard's expression hardened. Our son is in no condition to deal with confusion. He needs peace, not strangers complicating his recovery. I'm not a stranger. Ava's voice cracked. She turned back to Liam, desperate. Tell them who I am. Liam stared at her, eyes clouded, searching for something he couldn't find. The tug was there, but the memory was gone. I don't know. The floor seemed to vanish beneath her. Richard gestured to the nurse. Please escort this young woman out. Ava's heart splintered as security moved closer. She clutched the keychain tight, whispering hoarsely, I'll wait for you, Liam, no matter what. The door closed between them. Days later, Liam was discharged into a black car with tinted windows. The city blurred past as Richard explained rehabilitation plans. Eleanor fussed over his comfort. Liam sat silently, staring out at Brooklyn receding into distance. A heaviness pressed in his chest, as though he'd left something behind he couldn't name. The Hayes penthouse was everything the Delhi wasn't. Marble floors, sweeping views, silence that swallowed sound. His childhood room was perfectly curated, trophies, photographs, headlines, but nothing sparked recognition. At night, lying awake, he felt the weight of a missing piece. He saw flashes, laughter on a rooftop, the smell of cocoa, the warmth of someone's hand. A brass paper airplane, he whispered into the dark, testing the name that rose like a breath. Ava, it felt right, but no one was there to hear it. Across the river, Ava folded laundry at the laundromat, her body moving on autopilot. Her heart was raw, hollowed out. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him staring through her like a stranger. But she couldn't give up. She climbed their old fire escape, sat on the rooftop, and clutched the keychain to her chest. You promised me a runway, she whispered. Even if you've forgotten, I'll remember for both of us. And one day, you'll find your way back. The wind whipped her hair, carrying her vow into the night. CHK NG3, the Hayes penthouse overlooked Central Park, its windows stretching floor to ceiling like a command post above the city. Liam stood by the glass, staring down at the maze of lights and streets below. He'd been here a week, and still, it felt like standing inside someone else's life. Eleanor floated around him with quiet efficiency, bringing him herbal teas, adjusting the pillows, showing him photo albums filled with a childhood he couldn't recognize. Richard was more direct. Every morning, he pulled Liam into the back seat of a chauffeured car and drove him downtown to the Hayes Corporation Tower. You're the future of this company, Richard said during one of their rides. His voice was firm, his words heavy with expectation. You don't need your memories to understand that. What matters is who you are, Nand, who you will become. Liam nodded, but unease gnawed at him. He was supposed to be grateful, supposed to feel rescued. Yet, at night, in the penthouse's silence, he found himself whispering a name he couldn't explain. Ava. The sound of it was both anchor and ache. Meetings blurred together. Richard introduced him as his son, the heir, the future CEO. Handshakes were firm, smiles wide. But Liam always caught the quick glances, the unspoken question of where he had been all these years, of whether he was truly ready to wear the name. He tried to learn. He sat through presentations about mergers and markets, letting the language of finance wash over him like a foreign tongue. He took notes he didn't understand, but the ghost never left. When a secretary handed him a cup of hot cocoa instead of coffee, his throat tightened for reasons he couldn't name. when a paper airplane drifted from a child's hand on the subway platform. He froze, heart racing. The memories didn't come back fully, but pieces did, smells, sounds, sensations. They taunted him with the feeling that his life was built on missing foundations. Across the river, Ava sat in a laundromat that smelled of bleach and despair. She folded towels with mechanical precision, her body numb from exhaustion. Since the night of the accident, she hadn't been allowed near Liam. His family had shut the door so firmly she could almost hear it echoing that her friends told her to move on. He doesn't remember you, Ava. And even if he did, he belongs to another world now. But how do you move on from a life you built together? Every rooftop dream, every late-night taco, every whispered plant, they were stitched into her bones. So she did the only thing she could. She worked. She threw herself into her internship, stayed late in classrooms, signed up for every project. She refused to collapse. If she couldn't fight for their love, she would at least fight for her future. And late at night, when the city quieted, she'd trace the brass keychain with trembling fingers and whisper, "One day, you'll remember." Months rolled into years. Liam adapted to his new role, piece by piece. He wore tailored suits, sat at the head of conference tables, learned to speak the language of power. The world saw him as a polished heir stepping into his destiny, but inside he was divided. The boardroom applauded his poise. Richard praised his discipline, but at night, standing by the penthouse windows, he felt like an actor in a play he hadn't auditioned for. Meanwhile, Ava climbed her own ladder, from intern to analyst, from analyst to project manager. She worked double, sometimes triple, to prove herself. She was no longer the girl waiting outside a hospital door. She was becoming a woman who could command a room, yet success felt hollow without him. Every milestone, her first big contract, her first office with a view she imagined telling Liam, and every time reality reminded her that in his world, she didn't exist. Liam carried the scar from the accident at the corner of his hairline. It wasn't visible unless you looked closely, but he touched it often, as if it were a compass. One evening, Eleanor noticed. "Why do you do that?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "It feels like a door. One I can't open." Eleanor's smile was patient, but her tone was firm. "Some doors are better left closed, Liam. You're home now. Focus on what's in front of you." He nodded. But that night, he dreamed of laughter on a rooftop, of cocoa steaming in a chipped mug, of a girl's voice calling his name through the wind. When he awoke, the name was still on his lips. Ava by her Ava was no longer the laundromat girl with textbooks under her arm. She wore fitted suits, carried herself with confidence, and sat across from executives twice her age without flinching. But she hadn't forgotten. One night, after closing a deal that should have felt like triumph, she returned to her tiny apartment and pulled the keychain from her bag. It was tarnished now, the brass dulled, but the engraving still shone. FLY, First Love, You. She stared at it, heart aching. "You may not remember me," she whispered, "but I'll make sure when we meet again. You'll know who I've become." It wasn't just a vow to him anymore. It was a vow to herself. Liam, at 27, stood in his father's shadow, the polished heir of Hayes Corporation. Ava, at 26, stood at the edge of her own empire, sharp and relentless. They lived in the same city, breathed the same air, and yet their worlds had become galaxies apart. Neither of them knew it yet, but destiny was circling, biding its time. Their paths, once entwined, had been torn apart. Now, years later, they were about to cross again, not as lovers, but as rivals. The Hayes Corporation boardroom was a temple of power 40 floors above the city, with windows that stretched to the sky. The table gleamed, polished to a shine, surrounded by men and women in suits whose names carried weight on Wall Street. At the head of the table sat Liam Hayes, posture straight, suit impeccable, his father's shadow no longer looming over him. At 27, he had grown into the image Richard wanted, calm, authoritative, and precise. But inside, the hollowness never left. He carried it into every meeting, like a ghost hovering just behind his thoughts. Today's meeting was different. The stakes were higher than usual. Hayes Corp was negotiating a massive renewable energy contract with an up-and-coming firm that had taken the market by storm. The elevator chimed. Footsteps clicked against marble. The doors opened and she walked in. She entered the boardroom with confidence born from years of clawing her way upward. Her suit was sleek, her hair tied back neatly, her eyes sharp. Every step spoke of a woman who had battled her way into this room and belonged here. But to Liam, it was something else entirely. The air shifted. His chest tightened. There was that tug again, the one he had chased in dreams and shadows. The faintest flash laughter on a rooftop, cocoa in a chipped mug, a paper airplane glinting under streetlights. He blinked, jaw tightening. Ava met his gaze, her own eyes faltering for just a heartbeat before hardening into steel. He didn't recognize her, not fully, not the way she needed him to, but something in his stare told her he felt the pull to dot double quotes. Ms. La, Richard said smoothly, rising to shake her hand. Welcome. We've heard impressive things about your company. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Her voice was steady, professional, though her fingers gripped her briefcase tighter. We believe this partnership could redefine the energy sector. Liam said nothing. His gaze lingered on her like a question he couldn't quite ask. As the meeting began, the air in the room thickened. Ava presented her proposal with precision charts, projections, bold strategies that turned heads. She had prepared for this moment for years, rehearsed every word, every gesture. But every time she glanced at Liam, she felt the old wound tear open. He was right there, alive, successful, composed, and yet he was a stranger. Liam, on the other hand, couldn't stop watching her. Something about her cadence, the way she tapped her pen lightly when making a point, the fire in her eyes, it all scraped at the edges of his mind. At one point, she said, "If you're too afraid to risk, you'll stay broke forever." The words hit him like a punch. He had heard them before. He didn't know where or when, but they vibrated in his bones. Double quotes, Mr. Hayes, Ava said suddenly, pulling him back to the present. What's your position? Liam cleared his throat, leaning forward. Your numbers are strong. Your vision is bold. But boldness without history is dangerous. Hayes Corp doesn't gamble. It was a test. And a shield. Ava's lips curved faintly, though her heart cracked. Then maybe it's time you learned how. When the meeting adjourned, Richard congratulated Ava on her presentation, promising follow-up discussions. Executives shook hands, papers shuffled. The crowd dispersed. Ava gathered her things quickly, eager to escape before her composure shattered. But as she turned, she found Liam standing in her path. You, he said quietly, her breath caught. Me, what? He studied her, eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to read a language he'd once known. "Have we met before?" Ava's heart pounded. For years she had dreamed of this question, longed for it. But standing here now, she felt nothing but exhaustion. "Yes," she whispered. "But you don't remember." Liam blinked, his jaw tightening. He stopped, as though the words refused to form. Ava's smile was bitter. "Don't force it. Forgetting me was easier for you the first time. Don't strain yourself now." She pushed past him, heels clicking hard against marble, leaving him in the silence of the boardroom. That night, Liam stood at the penthouse window again, staring at the city. He poured a drink he barely touched, Ava. The name had risen, unbidden, when she walked into the room, and it refused to leave now. He rolled it over his tongue like a secret. Fragments flooded back warm laughter. A brass keychain promises whispered under city lights. But they slipped through his grasp like water. Richard entered, clapping him on the shoulder. "Excellent today. You kept control." Liam didn't answer. His mind was still on her. "Don't get distracted," Richard warned, voice sharp. "This is business. That girl, Miss Liz, ambitious. Use that, but don't let her get inside your head." But she was already there, in her apartment. Ava sat on her bed, the city humming outside. Her suit jacket lay tossed aside, her briefcase unopened. She pulled the tarnished keychain from her bag. The brass was worn, but the engraving was still legible. FLY, First Love. Her fingers tightened around it until her knuckles whitened. "He looked right at me," she whispered, and he still didn't know. Tears welled, but she blinked them back. No, she had fought too hard to let this break her again. If Liam Hayes had become her rival, then so be it. She would stand her ground. She would prove she could win even against the man she once loved. The city sprawled between them, glittering and vast. Liam in his penthouse, Ava in her modest apartment, both staring out windows at the same skyline, both haunted by memories, one trying to recover them, the other trying to bury them. Neither realized that destiny had no intention of letting them remain strangers. The morning headlines blared across New York's financial pages. Hayes Corp vs. Nova Energy. $1 billion contract up for grabs. For the business world. It was the clash of titans and established powerhouse against a bold disruptor. For Liam Hayes and Ava Lutter, it was personal. Reporters lined the sidewalks outside the Midtown Hotel where the contract bids would be presented. Cameras flashed as black cars pulled up. First came Liam, tall, composed, his presence commanding in a tailored navy suit. Moments later, Ava emerged from her car, confidence radiating from every step in her sharp grey blazer. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause as their eyes locked across the crowd. Neither looked away. Inside the ballroom, executives from the International Energy Commission filled rows of seats. Journalists whispered, pens ready. The stakes, a multi-billion-dollar renewable energy partnership that would shape the future of the industry. Liam presented first. His slides were immaculate, his voice smooth and steady. He spoke of stability, tradition, and Hayes Corp's decades-long track record. "We don't gamble with the future," he concluded. "We secure it." Polite applause followed. Then Ava took the stage. She didn't have Liam's family legacy or his towering skyscraper of resources, but she had fire. Her presentation was bold, innovative, filled with data that cut against Hayes Corp's conservative strategies. She looked directly at Liam when she said, "Sometimes, standing still is the greatest risk of all." The crowd stirred. Murmurs, buzzing. Richard Hayes's jaw tightened in the front row. Liam's pen snapped in his hand. The words felt like an echo from another lifetime. Afterward, both parties retreated to adjoining lounges while the commission deliberated. The walls were thin enough for tension to bleed through. Liam paced, his jaw clenched. Richard was furious. She's reckless. You cannot let her bait you. I'm not baited, Liam muttered, though his fists said otherwise. Richard's eyes narrowed. Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost every time she opens her mouth? Across the hall, Ava stood at the window, heart racing. Her team congratulated her performance, but she barely heard them. Seeing Liam again, hearing his voice, watching his expression flicker at her words, was like reopening a wound she had spent years stitching shut. She pressed the keychain in her pocket, a secret talisman she couldn't let go. Later, by sheer coincidence or maybe fate, they collided in the hallway. Ms. Liam's tone was cool, professional, but his eyes betrayed a storm. Mr. Hayes, Ava's chin lifted. Congratulations on your polished speech. Very safe. His jaw ticked. And yours was reckless. Or visionary, she shot back. Silence stretched between them. Their teams had drifted ahead, leaving them alone. Liam leaned closer, his voice low. Why do I feel like you're more than just another rival? Ava's throat tightened. For a moment, she almost told him everything. The rooftop dreams, the cocoa, the paper airplane. But then she saw Richard down the hall, watching. She forced her voice steady. Because I'm the rival who isn't afraid to beat you. She turned on her heel, leaving him frozen in place. When the commission announced their verdict, the contract was split half to Hayes Corp, half to Nova Energy. A diplomatic solution, a win for both, but also a declaration. Ava was no longer a nobody. She was a threat. Reporters swarmed as Ava left the building. Ms. La, how does it feel to stand toe-to-toe with Hayes Corp? She smiled into the cameras. It feels like the future belongs to those willing to fight for it. Liam watched from the steps above, the flashbulbs reflecting in his eyes. Something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about her. That night, Liam stood in his penthouse again, staring at the skyline. The city's hum seemed to whisper her name. He poured himself a drink, but the burn of whiskey couldn't drown it out. Ava, the name slipped out of him again, louder this time. He clutched his head, flashes breaking through. Her laughter, the fire escape, a kiss by the river. The memories were jagged, incomplete, but real. He grabbed his phone, almost dialing, but stopped. If he called, what would he even say? I think I remember you, but I'm not sure. Across the city, Ava sat at her desk, the keychain in her hand. She had won, at least partly. She should have been celebrating. Instead, tears burned her eyes. Why couldn't you remember me today? She whispered into the empty room. Why do you still feel like a stranger? In the days that followed, headlines painted them as opponents. The heir versus the disruptor. Stock markets buzzed, investors picked sides, but beneath the business rivalry, a different battle raged between memory and loss, between love and pride, between what had been and what could still be. Liam couldn't shake her. Ava couldn't let go of him. The city had set them on opposite sides of the board, but destiny, as always, had other plans. Liam woke with a start, chest heaving, sweat dampening the sheets. The city skyline outside his penthouse window glowed faintly, but inside, His mind burned with fragments of a dream. He saw himself running through the rain, Ava's voice calling after him. He saw the flash of headlights, the scream of tires, the sickening weightlessness before the crash. And then darkness. He pressed his palms into his eyes, groaning. The dream wasn't new. It had haunted him for weeks, but lately it was sharper, more insistent. And always, always, she was there. Ava, the name, had become a mantra, an ache in his bones. At Hayes Corp, he struggled to keep focus. During board meetings, the droning of financial reports faded behind memories surfacing like bubbles in water. The smell of hot cocoa, the scratch of her pen against notebooks, her laugh echoing against rooftop bricks. Once, during a presentation, a junior analyst spilled a cup of coffee. The sharp smell hit Liam, and suddenly he was back in a cramped Brooklyn deli, wiping counters, handing her a steaming cup of cocoa. He froze mid-sentence, gripping the table until his knuckles whitened. Richard shot him a sharp look, but Liam recovered quickly, brushing it off as fatigue got inside, though he knew it wasn't fatigue. It was memory clawing its way back. Meanwhile, Ava was building higher walls. Nova Energy was thriving, and her split victory against Hayes Corp had made her a star in the business press. Reporters called her the fearless disruptor, the woman who dared to challenge Hayes. She wore the title like armor, but behind closed doors, the armor cracked. Each time she saw Liam in the press, his face stern and composed, her chest tightened. Every meeting they attended together, every word they exchanged, chipped at the distance she was trying to maintain. Her friends asked why she didn't move on, why she hadn't dated in years. She deflected, claiming she was married to her work. The truth was simpler and crueler. She had already given her heart away, and the man who held it didn't remember. A month later, their paths crossed again at a charity gala. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, champagne flowed freely, and the city's elite mingled under golden light. Liam spotted Ava across the room instantly. She was radiant in a navy gown, her hair swept elegantly over one shoulder. For a moment, the world around her dimmed, and she was all he could see. He approached, ignoring the whispers that followed. "Ms. La," he greeted, voice low, almost reverent. She turned, her smile polite but distant. "Mr. Hayes, enjoying the gala." "Trying to," he admitted, "but I can't seem to shake this feeling. Every time I see you, it's like I'm supposed to remember something." Ava's breath caught. The words she'd waited years to hear were finally spilling out of him, but then she forced herself to steel her heart. "Maybe you're just mistaking familiarity for rivalry," she said coolly. "We've spent enough time competing for you to feel that way." Liam shook his head. "It's more than that. I know it." Ava's hand tightened around her glass. She wanted to tell him everything that he had loved her once, that he had given her the keychain she still carried, that he had been her entire world. But the memory of his blank stare in that hospital room cut deeper than any knife. She turned away. Some things are better left forgotten. Later that night, Liam slipped out onto the balcony for air. The city glowed beneath him, restless and alive. His thoughts circled back to her words, to her eyes, to the ache in his chest. When he looked back into the ballroom, he saw Ava slip a small object into her clutch. For just a moment, the light caught a brass paper airplane. The sight jolted him like electricity. His breath hitched. Paper, airplane. His mind flashed him handing it to her. Her kissing him by the river, her voice whispering, "I'll carry it everywhere." His heart pounded as the memory snapped into place. He staggered back, gripping the balcony rail, whispering her name into the night. Ava, back home. Ava sat on her bed, clutching the keychain in her hand. She had seen the way Liam's eyes widened when he spotted it. She had seen the flicker of recognition. For the first time in years, hope bloomed in her chest. But hope was dangerous. She had built her empire on discipline, on not needing him. If she let hope in, everything she had built might collapse. He's not the boy you loved anymore, she whispered to herself. He's Hayes Corp now. He belongs to their world. But even as she said it, her heart betrayed her. Deep down, she wanted to believe he was still hers. The next morning, Richard confronted Liam in his office. "You're distracted," Richard said flatly. "Ever since that girl came back into the picture, she's not just some girl," Liam shot back, surprising even himself with the force in his voice. Richard's eyes narrowed. "She's a competitor. Nothing more. Don't let her ruin you." Liam leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "What if she's the one thing that makes me whole?" Richard slammed his palm on the desk. "You don't need her. You need this company. That's your legacy." But Liam wasn't listening anymore. For the first time since the accident, he felt alive. He felt closer to truth than he had in years. That night, Liam found himself walking the streets of Brooklyn. Tracing old paths his feet seemed to remember even when his mind couldn't. He ended up outside a rundown deli, neon buzzing overhead. He stepped inside, the smell of grease and cocoa wrapping around him. The memories surged of her sitting at the counter. Hoodie pulled tight, her smile soft despite her exhaustion. His heart clenched. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over her number. This time, he didn't put it away. It was past midnight when Ava's phone lit up. She was buried in paperwork at her apartment, still in her blazer from the office. When the name flashed across the screen, her heart stuttered. For a second, she thought it had to be a mistake. He'd never called before. She stared, breath caught in her chest, until the ringing nearly stopped. Then, with trembling fingers, she answered, "Ava." His voice was low, raw. She closed her eyes. Just hearing him say her name was enough to unravel weeks of carefully built walls. Yes, there was silence on the line, heavy and charged. "Then, I remember. Something. Not everything. But I remember you." Her breath hitched. She pressed the phone closer, as if that could bridge the years between them. "What do you remember?" "Rooftops," he whispered. "The smell of cocoa. You laughing at me when I wrapped your gift in deli paper. A paper airplane." His voice broke slightly. "You kissed me by the river. You said you'd carry it everywhere." Tears burned her eyes. "I did. I still do, for the first time in years." She allowed herself to hope. They agreed to meet the next night, not in a boardroom or at a gala, but in the place where it had all begun, the rooftop of their old building in Brooklyn. Ava climbed the rusted fire escape, her heels clicking against metal, her heart pounding. She almost turned back twice, but then she saw him standing there, silhouetted against the skyline. Liam turned when she reached the roof. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the city humming below, the weight of years pressing down. "You came," he said softly. "I almost didn't." Her voice trembled, but she steadied it. "I didn't know if I could handle this." He stepped closer, the wind tugging at his suit jacket. "I don't remember everything. There are gaps. But when I saw that key..." He shook his head. It was like a door finally cracked open. And I saw you standing there. Ava's fingers closed around the brass airplane in her pocket. She pulled it out, holding it between them. This was the last thing you gave me. The night before the accident, Liam's throat worked as he reached for it, his hand brushing hers. I'm sorry, he whispered, for forgetting, for leaving you alone. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. It wasn't your fault, but it felt like I lost you twice, once to the accident, and again when your family took you away. Liam's eyes darkened with guilt. They told me you were no one, that you didn't matter, and I believed them because I didn't know any better. I let them erase you. You didn't let them, Ava said, voice fierce despite the tears. You didn't remember, but I did. Every night I remembered for both of us. The words cracked something open in him. He closed the distance, cupping her face in his hands. Then let me remember now. Tell me everything, every moment, every dream we had. She shook her head. It's not that simple. You're not the boy I knew anymore. You're Hayes Corp. You live in a world I don't belong to. Liam's grip tightened, his voice breaking. That's not true. I've been living in their world, but it never felt like mine. Not until now. Not until you. Ava searched his eyes, desperate to find the boy she had loved. And there he wasn't, the way his voice cracked, in the way his hands trembled, in the way he whispered her name like it was home. The wind rushed across the rooftop, carrying the sound of the city. Liam leaned in, hesitating just inches from her lips. I used to kiss you here, didn't I? Ava's breath caught. Yes, and then he kissed her. It wasn't polished or practiced. It was raw, messy, desperate, the kiss of a man reclaiming something he thought was lost forever. Memories flooded him like a tidal wave. Ava's laughter in the deli, her head on his shoulder as they watched the skyline, her voice whispering, I believe in you. He pulled back, gasping, eyes wide with shock and wonder. I remember, he whispered. God, Ava, I remember. For a long time, they stood there, foreheads pressed together, tears and laughter mingling. But the moment couldn't last. Reality pressed in their companies, their rivalry, the expectations of everyone watching them. We're still on opposite sides, Ava said quietly. The world sees us as enemies. Then let's change the world, Liam replied fiercely. She shook her head, pulling back slightly. It's not that easy. I've worked too hard to build what I have. I won't throw it away, even for you. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Then we'll fight. On the market, on the stage. But when the doors close, he reached for her hand. Don't let go of me again. Ava hesitated. Then, slowly, she laced her fingers with his. As the city roared beneath them, Liam and Ava stood hand in hand on the rooftop where it had all begun. The world would see them as rivals, but they knew the truth. They were two halves of the same story, finally finding each other again. Whatever happens next, Liam whispered, we'll face it together. Ava looked out at the skyline, her heart pounding with both fear and hope. Together, she agreed, and for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a promise. The rooftop meeting should have been enough to stitch them back together. For one fleeting night, Ava had felt the old warmth of Liam's arms, the familiar rhythm of his heartbeat, the truth of his kiss. And for a moment, she had let herself believe, but mornings had a way of ruining things. Ava sat in her office at Nova Energy, staring at the skyline through glass walls. Her staff filed past with updates, contracts, deals waiting for her signature. She nodded, gave instructions, forced herself into the role she had built so carefully, the fearless CEO. But beneath her polished mask, doubt gnawed at her. Can I really trust him? Yes, Liam had remembered pieces of their past. Yes, he had kissed her with the same fire he once carried in Brooklyn. But was that enough? The Liam she loved had been a boy chasing dreams. The man standing before her now was Hayes Corp, ruthless, powerful, chained to a family that had torn them apart. Her chest tightened. She couldn't let her heart blind her. Not again, across town, in the steel and glass fortress of Hayes Corp. Liam sat in his office, staring at the tarnished brass keychain he had managed to borrow from Ava that night. His thumb traced the engraved letters, FLY, First Love, You. Every time he looked at it, another fragment returned. The deli, the rooftop, the river. Ava's smile when she first held the keychain in her hands. He clenched his fist. I lost her once. I won't lose her again. But Richard's voice still echoed in his ears. She's a competitor. Nothing more. Don't let her ruin you. For the first time in his life, Liam knew his father was wrong. If business meant cutting out the one person who made him whole, then business wasn't worth it. Their reunion didn't pause the war between their companies. If anything, it intensified. Hayes Corp and Nova Energy were both bidding on a government-backed solar grid project that would dominate headlines. Billions were at stake. Journalists painted it as a battle of generations. The old guard against the fearless upstart at a press conference. Ava stood tall, delivering her pitch with precision. Reporters fired questions about her strategy, her boldness, her rivalry with Hayes. Nova Energy doesn't just sell power, she declared. We create a future worth living in. The applause was thunderous. Hours later, Liam gave his own speech at a different event. He was eloquent, commanding, careful with his words. But when a reporter asked about Ava, he didn't stick to the script. She's brilliant, he said simply. Fearless. She reminds this industry why innovation matters. The room buzzed with whispers. Compliments were not the weapons of rivals. Richard Hayes nearly exploded when he saw the footage. You're giving her leverage, he barked. She's using you, Liam. She's dangerous. But Liam only smiled faintly, eyes distant. Maybe she's the only one who isn't. That night, Ava watched Liam's interview on her laptop. She rewound it 3 times, listening to the way he said brilliant, the way his eyes softened when he spoke of her. Her throat tightened. He remembers enough to mean it, but then came the counter-argument in her own head. Or he's just playing you. Maybe Richard put him up to it. Maybe it's another trap. She pressed the laptop shut, shoving it away as if it had burned her. She refused to cry. She had built her company from nothing, brick by brick, scar by scar. She wasn't going to crumble just because Liam Hayes suddenly decided to remember, but her chest betrayed her. Tears slid down her cheeks anyway. Days later, the stress came to a breaking point. Ava was in the middle of a board meeting when the room started spinning. The sharp lines of graphs blurred, voices dulled into static. She pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to ground herself, but her pulse raced wildly. Ms. Le, someone asked. She stood abruptly, but her knees buckled. Papers scattered across the floor as she collapsed into her chair, gasping for air. The room erupted. Assistants rushed forward. Someone called for a doctor by the time she was helped into her office. Ava's head throbbed, her body trembling from exhaustion she could no longer hide. "You need rest," her assistant insisted. "You've been pushing too hard." But Ava shook her head, tears pricking her eyes. "I can't rest. If I rest, I lose. If I lose, then—" Her voice broke. "Then all those years of being alone mean nothing." When Liam heard what happened, he didn't hesitate. He ignored Richard's protests, cancelled his meetings, and went straight to Nova Energy's headquarters. Security tried to stop him at the lobby, but Ava's assistant let him through. Moments later, he was in her office, closing the door behind him. She was sitting on the couch, pale, a blanket draped over her shoulders. When she saw him, she stiffened. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to be," he said firmly. "I heard what happened." Her laugh was brittle. "What happened?" "Oh, you mean collapsing in front of my board, showing them their fearless CEO is just a broken girl who can't keep it together." Liam crossed the room and knelt in front of her. "No, what happened is that you carried too much for too long, alone, and it nearly destroyed you." Her lip trembled, but she looked away. "I don't need your pity. It's not pity," he said softly. He reached for her hand. "It's love. Ava, I remember enough now to know I loved you then. And standing here, I know I still do." Her defenses shattered. She buried her face in her hands, sobs racking her body. For years, she had carried the weight of being strong, of being unbreakable. And now, with him in front of her, the facade finally cracked. "I waited for you," she cried. "All those nights in the hospital, all those years after. I waited, and you never came." Liam's chest clenched. He pulled her hands gently away from her face, forcing her to look at him. "I didn't come because I didn't remember, but I do now, and I will never leave you again." She shook her head, tears streaming. "You say that now. But what about when your father tells you to cut me out? What about when the world says we can't be together?" "Then I'll choose you over the world," he said without hesitation. His voice was fierce, steady. "I'll burn down every deal, walk away from every boardroom if it means keeping you. Ava, none of this means anything without you." Silence fell between them, broken only by her quiet sobs. Slowly, she leaned into him, her forehead resting against his chest. His arms wrapped around her, holding her as if he could shield her from every storm she had weathered alone. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to collapse not as a CEO, not as a fighter, but as a woman who had once loved and lost, and who desperately wanted to love again. And Liam held her, whispering into her hair, "I remember, Ava. I remember us, and I'm not letting go." The next morning, rumors swirled across the city. Reporters whispered about the late-night visit, about Liam Hayes walking into Nova Energy and not leaving until dawn. Neither Ava nor Liam confirmed anything. But when they stepped out of the building together, side by side, the cameras flashed wildly. For the first time, they weren't just rivals or competitors. They were something more, something the city didn't have words for yet. And though the world still saw them as enemies, they knew the truth. The threads of memory had bound them together again. The city buzzed with anticipation. After months of tension, the government's solar grid contract, the crown jewel of the energy sector, was down to two contenders, Hayes Corp and Nova Energy. Billions were at stake. Careers, reputations, futures. The press framed it as the showdown of the decade. Headlines screamed, "The Airvies, the disruptor, who will power New York. But for Liam and Ava, it was more than a contract. It was the crossroads of their story. The hearing was held in a grand chamber downtown. Journalists crammed into every corner. Executives whispered nervously, cameras clicked. Ava arrived first, poised, her navy suit sharp against the polished wood. Liam entered minutes later, flanked by his father. When his eyes found hers across the room, a silent current passed between them. They were rivals here, but something deeper tied them together. Minutes before the presentations, Richard pulled Liam aside, voice like steel. "This is your moment. Don't let her distract you. You win this contract, you secure your legacy. You lose, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Liam's jaw tightened. "My legacy isn't this contract." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Then what is it?" Liam glanced toward Ava. She was reviewing her notes, calm but resolute. "Her," he said simply. Richard's face hardened. "If you throw this away for her, you'll destroy everything I've built." Liam met his father's glare, unflinching. "Then maybe it's time I build something of my own." When Ava stood to speak, she didn't just present numbers. She told a story about a childhood spent in crowded apartments, about nights when the lights went out because bills couldn't be paid, about why renewable energy mattered to families like hers. Her voice rang steady, passionate. Energy isn't just business. It's life. It's dignity. And Nova Energy isn't here to protect old empires. We're here to build a future where no child studies by candlelight. Applause erupted. Even the officials leaned forward, visibly moved. Liam's chest swelled with pride. This was the woman he loved, fearless, brilliant, unstoppable. When Liam rose, the room quieted. Everyone expected numbers, stability, another polished Hayes Corp pitch. Instead, he paused, scanning the audience. Then he looked at Ava. For years, Hayes Corp has been about tradition. He began about holding the line, protecting what already exists. But what Ava just said, she's right. The future doesn't belong to those who stand still. It belongs to those who dare to move forward. Gasps rippled across the room. Richard's face turned red with fury. "I believe in stability," Liam continued, voice clear. "But I also believe in vision. That's why I propose something different. Not Hayes Corp against Nova Energy. Not old versus new. But a partnership. Together, we can create something bigger than either of us could alone." The chamber erupted. Reporters scrambled. Officials exchanged startled looks. Ava's eyes widened, her breath catching. The officials recessed to deliberate. Richard stormed out, seething. "What have you done?" He hissed at Liam. "What I should have done years ago," Liam said calmly. "I chose the future, and I chose her. You're throwing away your inheritance." Richard barked. Liam met his father's gaze, steady. "No, I'm creating my own." When the chamber emptied, Ava found Liam standing alone by the window, the city stretching beyond. She approached cautiously, her heart racing. "You just threw your company under the bus," she said softly. He turned to her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "No, I freed it. And I freed myself." Her throat tightened. "Why?" "Because I remember now," he whispered. "Not just pieces, everything. The deli, the rooftop, the paper airplane, you, and I know one thing for certain. I can live without the contract, without the empire. But I can't live without you. tears stung her eyes. For years, she had dreamed of hearing those words. She had imagined them in the dark, whispered them to the keychain she still carried. And now they were real. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she admitted, voice trembling. "Not for forgetting, but for leaving me behind. For all the years I carried us alone." Liam stepped closer, his voice breaking. "Then let me carry us now. Let me earn it back, piece by piece, day by day. I'll never stop trying." Ava stared at him, her heart torn between fear and longing. Then, slowly, she placed the keychain in his hand. "You already did," she whispered. The chamber doors opened, officials filing back in. The verdict, Hayes Corp and Nova Energy would form a joint venture, the first of its kind. Together, they would lead the city's solar grid project. Reporters erupted, snapping photos, shouting questions. But Ava and Liam didn't hear them. On the steps outside, under a sky blazing with flashbulbs, he pulled her close and kissed her. Not a kiss of memories, but of promises of futures yet to be written, of battles to be fought together, not apart. The crowd roared. Headlines the next day would read, "Rivals turned partners and lovers." But for Ava and Liam, it wasn't about headlines. It was about finally, after all the pain, finding their way back. Weeks later, they stood together on their old rooftop in Brooklyn. The city shimmered around them, just as it had years ago. Liam held up the brass paper airplane, still tarnished, still etched with their initials. "This almost broke us, but it also brought us back." Ava smiled through tears. Then maybe it wasn't just a key. Maybe it was a promise. He slipped it back onto her bag, where it belonged. Then he took her hand. "Let's build our future," he said simply, and for the first time in years, Ava believed in forever. Asterisk. Years later, the skyline of New York glittered as it always had, but for Liam and Ava Hayes, it no longer looked untouchable. It looked like theirs. Years had passed since the rooftop where they had found each other again, since the day they shocked the world by turning rivalry into partnership. Nova Energy, once dismissed as an experiment, was now a global leader in renewable power, and at the center of it all, the press loved to remind the world, stood the power couple, Liam, the heir who rewrote his legacy, and Ava, the immigrant's daughter who rose from laundromats to boardrooms. Together, they were unstoppable at international summits. They sat side by side, fielding questions from leaders and journalists alike. At charity galas, they stood hand in hand, their presence commanding, their story retold as proof that love could outlast even the harshest odds. Yet behind the titles and headlines, they still stole quiet moments for themselves. On nights when schedules allowed, they climbed back to that same Brooklyn rooftop. The paint was peeling, the fire escape still groaned under their weight, but it remained their sanctuary. One evening, as the city buzzed below, Ava leaned against the railing, her hair caught in the breeze. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing all of this?" "All the time," Liam admitted. He slipped the brass paper airplane from his pocket, the same one, now polished but still etched with FLY, first love. "You, this little thing carried us through years of darkness." Ava smiled, eyes soft. "No, Liam, we carried each other, but power invited enemies. Not everyone celebrated their union. Competitors whispered about taking them down, rivals plotted new ventures, and politicians eyed their influence with suspicion. Liam knew storms were coming. Ava did too. "Do you ever worry?" she asked one night as they prepared for yet another trip overseas. "Every day," he said honestly. "But then I remember fear isn't the problem. Standing still is." The words made her smile because they weren't just his anymore. They belonged to both of them. Years had carved lines into their faces, but their love only grew stronger. They weren't the same boy and girl who once huddled on a rooftop with cheap cocoa and impossible dreams. They were partners, now in business, in life, in everything, yet the core of them had never changed. One night, as they left a shareholder gala, cameras flashing, Ava leaned close and whispered, "When the lights go out and the noise fades, it's still just us, Liam, always." He kissed her temple, the paper airplay warm in his pocket. "Always," he echoed. And so their story went on, not neatly wrapped, not without its battles still to come. The city would test them again, the world would demand more, and rivals would never stop circling. But through it all, they had what mattered, each other, hand in hand. Liam and Ava looked out over the city that had once tried to break them. Now it bowed to their will. The future stretched before them like the night sky vast, uncertain, infinite, and together they would write the rest.